So then I think we're almost everyone, just Catalina as well. Going? I think. So welcome back, and welcome to this panel on Indigenous rights versus climate mitigation, with or without a question mark. It's this is an issue that I mean it's a very current issue, and very sort of politically current issue around the world, that the needs of the green transition for green energy, whether it's hydroelectric dams or it's windmills or it's solar parks or it's particular forest regulation regimes, are sort of pitted against indigenous rights because it requires lands, mining, as we heard, for minerals that are used in batteries and so on, and these contestations are taking different forms, but there are also similarities across the world. And I think, of course, they're not new in Norway. We had contestations in the 80s over dams and rivers. The very, very famous Alta action, which I think was the first that really sort of made mainstream Norwegian population aware of struggles for Sami rights and territorial rights in Norway. But it's also been very, very current on this year. And we're going to hear more about that, because these are contestations that are taking place in courts over rights, and that place these matters in a particular way in the Norwegian context. So we're going to look closer at that. And this is really a very fabulous panel, because we have Anne Nilut from the Sami Parliament in Norway, a Sami politician, advisor to the Sami Governing Council, who can present this from the Sami perspective. We have Rasmus Berg, who's from the Friends of the Earth Norway, and who was very, very central in the demonstrations, and will speak to this alliance between Indigenous youth and environmentalists in this context that many in the media saw as paradoxical, aren't on different sides in this. So we're going to hear about that. We also will hear again from Sondre Pettersen about the role of music in particular and art in shaping identities and in these struggles. And then we're going to academic perspectives. So we'll hear from Camille Parker, who is a PhD candidate in Gothenburg, and who investigates Swedish Sami struggles over land and energy, and will tell us a little bit about sort of similarities and differences in where you have the same group of peoples but different political contexts. And then we'll go to the more global perspectives. So we'll hear from Jorge Peláez from Mexico from the Ibero-American University in Mexico, a lawyer, and we'll talk about how this looks from the Mexican context in particular. And then Catalina, who you already met, Catalina Vallejo, who's from IAFIT University in Colombia, in Medellin. We'll talk about this in Colombia, but also more broadly. So we have a wonderful panel, more insights than time, as always, but I know that they will be quite brief, so that we will have some time for discussion. But Anna, I want to start by asking you, so from the Sami perspective, how do you see this sort of contestation or this conflict between that is often posted in the media, very often. So, but we need windmills. So talk a little bit about the case, the Fosen case, and the political situation that emerged, and your view on this.
Olu kiihtuu podiumis. Mulla on Nilu Leheikka Bira Anna Henriette. So first of all, thank you for having me. My name is Anna Henriette Nilut, and I'm a political advisor to the Governing Council in the Sami Parliament, like I was so nicely introduced here. Just to give some, I will try to say something short about the Fosen case first, and I know we have many interesting people and not much time, so I will please ask later if I've missed some points. The Fosen case is really old in a way, you could say. Already in the change of the millennia, 99, 2000, the plans of wind parks in the Fosen area were announced and talked about. To jump fast forward, there were 4 really massive wind parks finished around 2018-19, whereas Roan and Storheia, these parks are like, I think, Northern Europe's biggest wind turbine parks. And the reindeer like Sidas or Fosen South and North Fosen Sikte, they contested this in the courts. And in 2001, the Supreme Court said that the mitigation measures that were made for the reindeer herders, that they were to put the reindeer in enclosures and feed them during the winter. That was not enough. So the ICCPR, like International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 27, that states that we all have the right to our own culture, was broken. It's a threshold. So, and it hasn't happened many times that the Supreme Court has found that the threshold has been broken. But this time they did, unilaterally. And nothing happened, even though the Supreme Court said that the human rights of the Sami reindeer herders in Fosen were broken. So 500 days later, I'm guessing you're speaking more about it, a big demonstration took place in Oslo, led by the youth, both from the Sami community, but also like environmentalist supporters, you would call them. I call them human rights fighters. And they finally got the Prime Minister Støre and the Oil and Energy Minister Aasland to say, we are sorry, we are breaking the human rights. And you should think, okay, I've said sorry, so maybe I should try fixing what I've been doing. No. And when you apologize for something, you have an obligation to repair the damage you've done. But we are still at 670-ish something days, and still nothing. They are saying they are trying to come to an agreement with the reindeer herders, but in light of what we've seen last week up north in Melkøya, where they decided now to build power lines and wind turbine parks to electrify an oil and a gas station, then it doesn't seem like we are getting anywhere. So shortly, I've seen 2-minute signs. I'm just going to shortly start saying something about the political climate about this, because we are also often met with, okay, but everyone has to give for the green transition. Well, first of all, the indigenous people of the world have given and given and given and given again and again and again. And some reindeer Sidas are now given 80% of their land already. So when is it enough? Second, if we are trying to build a just and green world, then we need true justice. And we cannot build true justice on breaking human rights. So that should already be a big red flag for us. And biodiversity and defending like the, I won't say untouched land, but some like carefully used land is important in that regard. the wetlands they destroyed for building the one wind park, one of the wind parks in Rouen, they said it could have let out as much as 300,000 tons of CO2, just the one wetland. So that's also something that's lost when we're talking about the green transition. And it's always, you're always met with this, but everyone has to give, and it is for our collective future. But it is green colonialization, because the very communities that have lived sustainably and harmoniously are now facing displacement and disruption in the name of sustainability. And who decides what's sustainable? So that's also something that's not, the definition is, in my opinion, very shady. So I think I've used maybe my time right now, and I think we could talk about this for like 2 more days. But yeah,
we can.
Yeah,
for sure.
but I will stop and give the word.
Thank you, thank you. So Rasmus, tell a little bit about what happened and how the environmentalists see this.
Yeah, so I guess I can just briefly introduce myself as well. My name is Rasmus, as Siri said. So I'm 21 years old now. So I like to at least claim to still be a youth activist, but you could start asking questions about that title quite soon at least. And I was one of the people who entered the Ministry of Oil and Energy in February. I did so with 18 other people, 16 activists, most of them being Sami youths, everyone except for 2, I believe, and a couple of people from my organization who was kind of like there for a support team, which was also my role. Of course, those protests grew kind of out of proportions. We were thinking to stay inside for maybe 8 hours, 10 hours, and then the police would come and carry us away. But it ended up being 4 days, and then a week of camping outside the entrance as soon as we got out of the arrest. So yeah, I hope at least most of you have heard about the protests and what has happened after that as well. It does actually come quite naturally for us to participate in a protest like this and to fight for Indigenous rights as well, of course. We in the environmental movement like to view ourselves as human rights defenders and rights activists. And of course, you academics would probably say that human rights are indivisible and interconnected, but we would just say you can't pick which rights you fight for and not. So as soon as it was clear that this is a human rights violation, once that Supreme Court judgment was final, it was just no question we had to support, of course. You could make utilitarian arguments that, for example, 80% of the biodiversity in the world is being kept alive almost by indigenous people on indigenous lands. 40% of intact ecosystems are on indigenous lands. You can construct these kind of environmental arguments as to why you should join the fight anyways. And Henriette mentioned that nature works as a carbon sink, that we need it for a green transition anyways, so why would we destroy nature? But you shouldn't have to come to that point before you decide to stand in solidarity with the Fusen Samis. Yeah, I think you can just end it there, and then we can hopefully have a discussion later as well.
So that was excellent. Thank you so much, Rasmus. Really good. One of the things that I think was striking to many of us with these demonstrations were also the sort of how broad it was and how much it used different. I mean, it used symbolism to an extremely large effect. It used different types of cultural and artistic memes. You took some amazing photographs that went the world around. And I think sort of this also brought us attention to something that we know, but not, at least not from the academia so often thematize, which is the role of art in these political processes. So Sondre, I wanted you to reflect a little bit about music in particular, but the role of art in these struggles.
Yes, thank you. So I've already introduced myself musically. And So we'll skip that part. I will just begin with the fact that in the Northern Sami language, one doesn't separate culture and nature. So already there you have a huge epistemic difference. So when I'm going to talk about yoik and music here, it is nature, right? And so for some short history, yoik is considered the oldest living musical singing tradition in Europe today, probably more than 2,000 years old. It's an intrinsic part of Sami culture. It has been tightly linked with both daily life, work, education, religion, and much, much more. Yoik was demonized, like I've been talking about, by the church from the 17th century and disappeared from many Sami areas, including my home Sami area. During the Norwegianization period from 1850 to 1950. And in my own Sami area, both the language and the yoik died during this forced assimilation. Today, there are many new Samis, like myself, taking back their Sami identity and culture. And therefore, my ethnicity today is both Sami and Norwegian with Kvani roots. And my identity is also a lot of different other things. And so we've been talking about the Alta conflict. From around 1960 then onwards, there has been a revival of yoik, and which is tightly linked to the mobilization. And a famous example of the use of yoik in mobilization is the Alta case. And without going too far into that one, it was the Alta conflict was a series of protests in Norway in 1970s, early 80s, concerning the construction of a hydroelectric power plant in the Alta River. And yoik was used as part of that activism, and yoik is still tightly linked with activism and also in Fosen today. And this is where we've been talking about different epistemologies. Yoik and music is its own epistemology. And I think we really need this epistemology in this day and age, together with the spoken word and the arts in general. I'm speaking from a musician's perspective mostly now, but there's lots of other beautiful aspects of Sami art, of course. So there's been the resurgence of yoik from 1960s, artists like Mari Boine, Frode Fjellheim, Nils Astad Kvalkpa, which I did yoik from, and recently kind of an explosion of new Sami artists, which is beautiful, and I think it's linked, and my hope is that it's linked to actual change happening. And in my own projects, I also go into yoik, but the meeting of yoik, jazz, electronic music, climate science, a living culture is always developing, and yoik is certainly developing today into many new areas, and I'm excited to see that. And there are many reasons why I want to investigate yoik in terms of working with climate science. Yoik is deeply connected to nature, like so many indigenous music forms. It can teach about the relation between human and nature. It certainly has taught me a lot on the more spiritual and personal level about my relationship to nature. I believe that the epistemology of yoik may play a part in the Green Revolution. Yoik has the possibility, like other music, to speak very directly to our feelings. There is this scientist in Bergen, Kulch, working with language. He says that language, the part of the brain that construct language, then the written spoken word is only a small part of that, and music is the broader part, right? So we're only speaking in a narrow band of our epistemology of what is ontology when we're speaking in words. Music is a kind of broader scale here. And in the end, I want to say that I also would join the choir of not saying indigenous rights against climate mitigation, but saying it really goes hand in hand. We have this beautiful agreement to protect nature recently. 30% of the globe needs to be protected. And I don't see why this doesn't go hand in hand with indigenous peoples, reindeer herders, Norwegian Sami, Norwegian sheep herders, to protect the land by using it in ways that we have been using it for hundreds of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Sondre. Thank you so much. So Camille, so you you study this. You work on your PhD. You study Sami struggles, legal struggles over land, and how would you sort of, do you see differences? You've been following the Swedish, but also the Norwegian. So how do you see these struggles emerging across Scandinavia?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Cami. I'm part of a research project on the land rights litigation by Sami groups in Finland, Norway, and Sweden, based at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. And yeah, maybe I can just briefly give some insights into what may explain that land rights litigation differs between Norway and Sweden in the case of the Sami people. Maybe two reasons that may explain this is that the political organization of the Sami people differs between the two countries, and also that the legal systems themselves are different. In Norway, if my numbers are right, there are between 50,000 and 65,000 Sami people. In Sweden, there are between 20,000 and 40,000. So in Norway, the Sami people is recognized as an indigenous people, and in Sweden, we talk more about the Sami as an ethnic minority with special rights, but not as an indigenous people. The Sami parliament in Norway has been described as the most powerful between the different Sami parliaments in Norway, Finland, and Sweden because of its autonomy, influence, and also budget. And it has an advisory power, for example, on land rights issues. In Sweden, it's more a representative body, but it's also a government agency. So its task is more to monitor cultural issues about the Sami culture. And so in Norway, the Sami politics are quite integrated into the national politics, whereas in Sweden, it's more separated. And this is also related to the fact that Sami rights in Sweden are closely linked to reindeer herding, exclusively. So it means that Sami people who are not reindeer herders don't have these rights. And the Sami society in Sweden is also divided along these lines. Then maybe briefly about the territorial rights for the Sami people in in Norway and Sweden. So my colleagues in the project have counted the cases of litigation for land rights in the two countries, and so they were the three countries, Finland, Norway, and Sweden, and they found 35 cases that reached the Supreme Court level, and 25 cases of litigation under international human rights treaties. And it may even be more, because depending on how you define land rights litigation, so we are still working on that. So in Norway, the Sami rights relate to reindeer herding, hunting, and fishing. And for example, reindeer herding rights are based on the principle of immemorial usage, and this idea of immemorial usage is not as extended in Sweden. And Norway has also ratified international conventions such as ILO 169, that has provisions on indigenous people's land, and also the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, with the rights of minorities to have their own culture. And it's not the case of Sweden. And maybe also something about the I'm not sure how much time I have.
Maybe we can, if you have one more point, you can take it, or we can just...
So just briefly, so the development projects for the energy transition now are of course happening in Sami lands mainly, and maybe a discourse that is quite strong is that these development projects are meant to serve the energy transition, and which is, I feel, a bit concerning because it may place the Sami litigants and other groups in a position as if they were the opponents of the green transition. And there is also this idea that comes often that, for example, reindeer herding and the green transition are compatible, which is also contested by the litigants. So yeah.
So thank you very much. So this is very fascinating. I mean, I don't think we said that, but Sápmi, the Sami area cuts across Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. And it is very fascinating how different the situation is in the two countries. But I want to ask you actually about Mexico, because some things are very similar. And that is also quite interesting, how strikingly similar things are really in very different parts of the globe.
Thank you. Rustic, for that reason, I'm going to read some ideas. In Mexico, a slow and limited process of energy transition has been carried out at the expense of territory of indigenous peoples and communities, and without a true process of consultation and participation. That process has triggered new and extensive mobilization, including socio-legal mobilization. I identified two different moments in the transition process toward green energy in Mexico that shape different types of mobilization process. The first moment between 2006 and 2018, during this moment, the energy transition and green energy model based on large-scale business models, beginning with the government of Felipe Calderón and until the energy reform of 2013 that introduced in the law the obligation to carry out prior consultation for any energy project. Both open opportunity for legal mobilization that I'm going to tell now. For the first moment, I want to mention 4 cases in 3 places in which you can see the expansion of this type of projects in the territories of indigenous people that were judicialized. The first is the Isthmus of Tehuantepec with wind energy project, a large-scale wind energy project. The first case is, the first name was Renewable Mareñas project that was rejected and relocated to another neighboring area under the name, with other name, that South Wind Project. The project was approved, the second project was approved. A prior consultation process was carried out after the Energy Regulatory Commission had granted the generation permit for the company. This case was brought to the Supreme Court, and the court concluded that the standard for indigenous consultation has not been violated. Even the permission was after the, this case, and this is a case where the community was divided and could not avoid entering the consultation process. The second case in the same place, the Unión Hidalgo, is a longer process that involves agrarian lawsuit, consultation action, amparo in Mexico, and international legal action. Today, it is detained under an amparo ruling for lack of consultation. There are just 2 cases, but anyone who has arrived to the Isthmus by land or air in recent years can see how wind turbines occupy all territories in the Isthmus. The second case is in the Yucatan Peninsula. The name is Tikul A and Tikul B solar energy project. They intend to install more than 1 million photovoltaic solar panels in a total of 634 hectares, of which 600 hectares of medium forest must be removed. As a consequence of social mobilization and legal mobilization, this project is stopped. The same is the third case in the Sierra Norte, Puebla state, with hydroelectric project. The second moment, I'm going to finish now, starting in 2018 and until now, there was a change in the green transition model with AMLO, the current president. We have a return to fossil fuels, greater importance in the public discourse of indigenous people, but from a paternalistic perspective. Environmental struggle are focused on two of the current president major projects, Maya Train and Interoceanic Corridor, nationalization of lithium and projection of public investment for the development of lithium mining project, although the deposits are not located in the territory of indigenous people. The federal government stopped pushing large-scale green energy project. There's not good reason, but they stopped this kind of transition, and no new mining concession have been granted. So, finally, I have to say two things in the context of how is the dynamic between organized social actors and between this and the institutional ones, particularly in courts. First, in short, environmental activists and activists of indigenous people and communities are allies in Mexico today. There is not a strong contradiction between both political, social, and legal agenda. And in the second place, between 2018 and 2021, I built a database of socio-environmental conflict in order to develop a typology of legal repertory. And during this work, and from in-depth knowledge of several cases, I was able to notice an apparent greater effectiveness of the legal mobilization process when environmental arguments were present as opposed to arguments related to rights of indigenous people. And for that reason, I'm going to, with Tatiana Alfonso, to start a new database, try to see this hypothesis of why this happened in Mexico. Thank you.
Yes, Catalina. Sort of on the basis of what you've heard now and looking at Latin America more broadly, what is your perspective on effectiveness of mobilization and conditions?
Siri, I recognize, I can relate from the situation in Colombia particularly. Some years ago, we studied climate change litigation, and we found that, for example, when it comes to licensing of new projects for renewable energy, we found always mixed results. So, and when the judges, so most judges were open or decided in favor of new incentives, for example, for the renewable energy industry, and they were in favor of renewables in general, but the problems that they found and the reason that many times they didn't, they were not positive towards the licenses was other environmental problems, like landscape, affecting the landscape, or birds or other animals, or also noise, the noise. But I think the social rights aspect hasn't been, or at least at that point, it was not very much discussed in the cases. And this is what we are listening here today. And I've been studying a little bit of new developments on offshore wind in Colombia. So we are like developing regulation, and with the aim is to start next year with new projects in the Caribbean Sea offshore. And we have a new government since last year, the government of Gustavo Petro, and he has begun to promote the energy transition with a very special focus on wind energy. And he wants to accelerate, the whole government wants to accelerate clean energy projects, which on the one hand sounds great, but then this acceleration, what does accelerating means when you have also tons of social rights problems in the country unresolved, and many indigenous communities and also Afro-descendant communities, and a big problem with prior consultation. So we have, we don't need more legal, perhaps more laws on legal, on prior consultation. There is sufficient law, jurisprudence. We ratified ILO 169. However, the real use of the tool to not only consult communities and then go do the project anyway, it hasn't really been very useful or very well implemented in Colombia. And so today we have in the northern part of Colombia, in the Caribbean Sea, a place called La Guajira, which is one of the places with like more potential or very, very, very good potential for wind energy production, onshore and offshore as well. And there are 16 wind parks active or in construction there in La Guajira at the moment. And La Guajira is the territory of the Wayu people in Colombian indigenous community, who is, I think that's the region with more poverty when it comes to indigenous groups in Colombia. So there is a historical neglect of the Wayu people, and there is also previous harms from hydroelectric power projects. So this hasn't been done well in the past, and now with this idea of accelerating the energy transition and this place being so good for wind energy production, so we have this tension of rights. On the one hand, we all want the energy transition, we all want better, cleaner energy, but on the other hand, not again reproducing the same problems or evils of onshore oil extraction in Colombia, oil and gas extraction in Colombia, and it seems like this is where we are going. So I think I will leave it for there now.
No, I think that was super useful, and I think you've all six of you have given really important sort of parts of the prism that shows this tension. So it's not that it's, I think, you all but Rasmus put it really, really well. It's not sort of theoretically or politically, it's not necessarily a conflict, but it's a way, and legally there are in many cases, although it differs, ways to protect the rights of indigenous peoples within the transition. But politically, there are so many ways of sort of constructing that conflict that means that you can sidestep in important ways. You can consult afterwards. I think that is absolutely quite interesting, and I, unfortunately not at all uncommon, I think. And also you can just not comply with the decisions. You can just sort of negotiate afterwards. Rasmus, did you want to add something?
Maybe I should say a couple of words about when this conflict between indigenous rights and climate mitigation fits into a narrative of climate justice. And that is, as I think a lot of people have been talking about earlier, is through the extractionist lens. It is through the view of the companies, the renewable companies, thinking that this is a way to profit off of the green transition. It is a way of extracting the most amount of resources when you can. And it's not really what environmentalism should be about either, because we don't necessarily need to build every single wind park. We don't need to build as much energy production now as we have from fossil fuels. I would add that Norway commits a much worse crime with their fossil fuel production. And that is also something that they touch on in the Fosen case, in the Supreme Court ruling, that they do talk about, is this in conflict with the right to a healthy environment? That indigenous rights should be absolute, that they should not be violated if the society at large demands it, but can be weighed up against other rights. And I did check for that in the court case and found that, yeah, they could have just placed the wind park anywhere else. It was just maximizing money.
Thank you. I think that's super important. And then you also wanted to comment on this.
Yeah, I will just add that especially one of the largest one, Storheia, was not supposed to be built at all. It was supposed to be south of the fjord, closer to the big city, Trondheim, but then they moved it to the reindeer grazing land. So yeah, it's a paradox. Well, I would just like to say, and that's serious, talking back to me here. Well, I think that true sustainability, we can't have that without social justice. So in regard to legislation and law, although, for instance, Norway has ratified the ILO 169 and UNDRIP is strong here, then we don't have free, prior, and informed consent. And even though we have our own law on consultation, just last week, the Prime Minister with the Big Bang announced this big building. And to say it like this, I think I read somewhere that there was somewhere close to, like, I don't know how many wind turbine parks they needed in Finnmark in order to have enough electricity for this gas plantation, but it was a lot. And they said in the same press conference that, of course, we're gonna have consultations. So basically, it sounds like we're gonna have consultations, but we've already decided what we're gonna build, but we're gonna have consultations, so we can say that we had a dialogue. And the consultation is really about telling you what mitigation we will make for what we are gonna build for the great society. And I think if I can just fastly add to that, that I'm missing in the conversation about green transition and sustainability is energy efficiency, how we can make our buildings more sustainable, how we can look at our how much we consume. Because, of course, if you have capitalism, it's a system that it is basically made up of that the need for something needs to be bigger than what we can offer. So that it's a consummation-driven system. And is there a threshold? Probably yes, there is a threshold. At what point can't we consume anymore without wreaking complete havoc? So I think that's also, considering that we have built a world, an international community, on a system that's in its baseline isn't sustainable, then how are we going to make that sustainable?
And how can we make that the discussion as well?
Thank you.
Excellent. So now I'm going to, you can applaud that. Now I'm going to open up the discussion, and I'm going to sort of allow, now we have 16 minutes left. So if you want, you can line up if you have any questions to the group. Otherwise, I'm sure that you'll be able to address the questions. And then I'll just take the ones that are there, and then I'll give you 1 minute each at the end. So select your question.
Thank you. Once again, this was a fantastic panel. And, you know, I think what's coming out through the day is the fact that that, you know, whatever country it might be, but essentially the state capital nexus versus the rights of indigenous communities everywhere, that is under threat, and that we cannot really respond to any of these questions or these issues of justice, like, you know, justice for whom, by whom, without actually addressing the systems that are there. And, you know, to add to what you just said about, you know, the fact that the whole capitalist system is based on consumerism. So how do we kind of bring about climate justice within that kind of system? But again, it was really interesting to me how, you know, and that is, I think, where we can contribute, in the sense that how is it that if the Sami community, which is spread across 4 countries, and yet some systems are working better than others, even if they are not, I mean, of course, we need a radical overhaul, and, you know, it's kind of like indigenous communities of the world unite, as Marx would say. But but within what we have as well, it's really interesting to see what makes a difference and what doesn't. And I'm just wondering how much historical contingency and temporality has to play apart from institutions in the way that some of these countries have reacted, and how much is it hegemonic discourses like neoliberalism, like the development discourse, which so basically are there discourses that frame even our understanding of contestations around rights. So when you say indigenous rights versus social and economic rights, what is even a social and economic right is decided by the hegemonic discourse of neoliberalism or statism or socialism and so on. So how do we think about that? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Larissa. I'm so sorry I'm the one with the timeline, so everybody hates me on every table, but I really wish I could hear you. I was speaking for hours. But I was really interested in, especially when Camille presented like an academic view or how the Sami movement is organized, and we heard 3 Sami people actually talking about how it's like in Norway. I'm really interested in like considering that apparently the Sami parliament and the Sami participation in political scene in Norway is the most successful one, and that's still, the reception you get from the government and the reception you get from the judicial system. I wonder how you see that, how actually you think you were included, and how much of it is more like in the consultation scheme of, okay, we are actually talking, we are actually asking, but in reality, everything is set beforehand, everything is decided beforehand. And also, it's just a side comment, but my dad works with energy in Brazil, and I was absolutely horrified with the energy system in Norway, not just how the buildings are not done in a way in which you save energy, but how the distribution of energy in Norway is incredibly badly done and badly taught. And so I think it's more than thinking about windmills. I think it's really about how sharing the energy that you guys already produce, because you sell so much to like Sweden and you have to produce extra energy when you're selling it. So I feel like it's a really mass, and it's really interesting how in comparatively a small country, how this has not been seen in a way of sharing what's produced, but in going in semi-land people and just being like, okay, let's produce more energy, but now it's green. And we ignore the fact that we produce a lot of fossil energy. So Norway prides itself so much of being so eco-friendly, and there are so many unfriendly things going on. So I also want to take on your take on that, like as Norwegian people and as Sami people, how you see that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Larissa.
Hi, so I just have I thought it was a phenomenal panel. Again, thank you. I have a pretty discrete question for Jorge and Catalina. I do a lot of work on health rights litigation in Latin America, and my intuition is that the Supreme Court in Mexico is overly deferential to certain administrative and executive processes, which sounds quite a bit like what you were saying, Jorge, on the prior approval, which was actually after the fact. And in Colombia, it's a very interventionist court that even sets out, indicators of goce efectivo, but often, especially when there are non-state actors, has weak capacity to push for implementation. And the UiB case in the Cerrejón mine has had various judgments. So I'm just wondering if the two of you could comment on that comparatively.
Thank you, Alicia. Gitte?
Thank you. My name is Gitte Sætre, and I'm an artist from Norway, working a lot with the Norwegian identity, which is full of contradictions. And I wanted to mention through working with this, I managed to connect with a network called Global Coastline Rebellion. I don't know if any of you have heard about it, but as a Norwegian, we have atrocities going on in Peru, in Argentina, several places in Africa that the Norwegian don't really think about. And so what we do is that that activists from these countries connect with activists in the nations that are doing the crime abroad. And this network is also connected up with lawyers. So I just wanted to mention Global Coastline Rebellion.
Thank you. And I just want to mention that Gitte is from Kunsthal 314, and that's where we're going tonight to look at the exhibition and have the conversation. So it's also part of this engagement with art.
Thank you. Thank you for the panel. I thought it was great, very important. And as well as saying it's not indigenous people's rights versus energy transition, you're also making very important contributions about what we talk about, what is green energy, right? Because it's often posed as, you know, anything's better than fossil fuels and we have to make this transition. But some of the things, for example, I know that Jorge is talking about, there's solar farms covering, you know, I mean, the ecological damage of a solar farm on that scale is absolutely massive. So I wanted to ask a little about scale, yeah, and whether there's a debate within the Sami communities about community energy generation as well, or kind of distributional questions and scale questions.
So thank you very much. I think these are super important questions. And even if there is, I mean, there is a contestation over the space. So in a way, that is where the contestation is. So there is a contestation over the land. And linking to what Rachel said, I think if we look at Norway, what is how sort of traditionally, for instance, hydroelectric power was communally owned for a large part by the kommune, by the municipality. Of course, Finnmark was quite, the colonialism of the Norwegian state in Finnmark meant that Norway had much larger rights to land and water in Finnmark than in the rest of the country. But generally, there has been this sense that the community owns the energy, sort of the hydroelectric energy, the energy resources, and also when carbon was built with oil. But what's happening here is, of course, that the companies who are building these wind farms are, nobody really knows who owns them. They're international companies with paying hardly any taxes. I mean, the idea that the vast majority of the profit should go back to the community is very much gone. So it's the whole organization of these actors and the relationship between the hydroelectric sort of capitalist system and the state is very different from what it used to be. So I think, in that way, Norway is similar to what has been the case in many other parts of the world for a long time than it used to be, perhaps. So I just wanted to add that because it links to what Rachel was saying as well, that there is also both, in addition to the physical part of it, there is also the different economic dimensions. But now I will go back to each of you. You'll have a minute each to answer what you think is most, or comment on what you thought was most important for people to remember from the panel and answer whatever you think is useful. So I'll start with Anne-Henriette again.
Thank you, and I won't be able to say, just find me after the panel, and I will save some of my answer to the truth and reconciliation, because especially about the implementation gap between what laws are actually decided and what's happening, that there's a gap. We'll get back to that. So I think that we have to think more holistically, because the world today, we have a lot to learn from indigenous societies, because I think the world is getting quite grotesque, because the differences between poor and rich, and I have to say, in Norway we are no saints. I don't think it's sustainable in any measure that everyone in the world should have the living standard and the consumerism we have here, because Norway, we are, just to have that said. So there seems to be like a fight of narratives around green transitions, and I think we all have to be aware about thinking about what does this word mean, and how can we all work towards the same direction without losing our humanness along the way. I will stop there. Yeah.
Rasmus?
Not sure if I can answer any of the questions quite directly now, so please do find me after the panel as well. I'd love to talk to a lot of you people. You seem like a great bunch. Just thought I'd say something about Norwegian hypocrisy, because it is very much so the extractivist perspective, the industrialist perspective that rules even climate policies in Norway. It is always a conversation about how much green energy should we produce and not when is it enough. It's always about how do we make money, how do we make sure that the workplaces are intact, which is of course very, very important, but a lot of other perspectives are being forgotten because of just how ingrained Norwegian industrial politics is in every other kind of politics in the country.
Very important. Thank you. Sondre.
Yeah, so I would just follow up on the oil question and say that I think it's, of course, very terrible because we've signed the Paris Agreement, and if but we're at the same time opening searching for new places of oil and opening them up, and this is like it doesn't add up at all. So you're kind of signing then saying, oh, we're working towards this goal, but we're really not, because we're gambling on it not happening. That's how I see it. Because if it's going to be profitable doing all this oil in like 40, 50, so many years in the future, then the world will be at a really dark place. So this is just my view on that situation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Camille.
Yes, there was a question on how hegemonic discourses, also by Namita, would frame the rights of indigenous peoples. So in the case of Sweden and of Sami rights, so there is really this idea that Sami people have rights as reindeer herders, so as business owners. So it's really shaped in economic terms. It also means that it's a lot of other considerations which will not be taken into account.
Excellent. Thank you. Jorge.
I agree with the comments, and there are a lot of themes that is very more complex that I can articulate in English in 1 minute. For that reason, put to Catalina.
Gracias, Jorge. Yes, I think for me, the connecting Alicia's question with like what's the takeaway for me from this panel, I think I will also talk about the implementation gap. So so it's a bit, I don't know. I want to continue believing that it's very important to have rights declarations and court judges' declarations about rights violations. This is not important. This is important, especially in Colombia. It's very important that the Wayo community, which is one of the poorest of the country, and the problems that there really are, children malnutrition, children dying of thirst, is like as bad as it gets. That the judges acknowledge that the state has a duty to protect these human rights and that there is a situation of violation of rights and something needs to be done. However, articulating the judicial branch with the work of the executive branch has been a challenge for many decades. And we see that even with the new government we have now, it's a very difficult articulation because these sort of structural problems that the constitutional courts and Supreme Court touch upon, even though they are very interesting and they attempt to bring structural solutions to structural problems of socioeconomic rights, then it doesn't really translate into structural reorganization of the state or or really thinking about these deep questions like, okay, how about consumption? How about why there and not like all the other questions, no? Just not accepting all of the assumptions about the energy transition.
Thank you, Catalina. Thank you, everyone. This has been absolutely amazing. And I think, so this has been wonderful. And we're after the break, we actually continue the discussion on neoliberal environmentalism in a different context when it comes to deforestation policies. But I just want to say like one small thing, which was fascinating from the Norwegian context, was the effective use of the court judgment in mobilization. And I think that when we talk about not being able, that the law isn't working, and I think that we need to think about the different ways that it's working, because even if it hasn't led to implementation, it has really sort of changed the imaginations of Norwegian society on these issues, I think. Thanks a lot. Thanks very much. You'll get cops.